I'm Bob Martin from MITRE. I work in MITRE Labs and work across MITRE's portfolio of civilian and national security systems. And I think many of you may know me through my engagement out in industry and academia and standards and such. What I want to talk to you about is an effort that we started a couple years ago with some internal funding aimed at a customer problem that wanted to get a handle on how do we address supply chain trust and understand the risks of the suppliers, the supplies, and the service offerings. And it's quite a chewy problem, as we've been talking about many aspects of it this morning. But what I wanted to offer up is, let's step back a moment and really think about what is a supply chain. You're going to bring some raw materials. They may be harvested or manufactured. You're going to create intermediate goods, and often lots of intermediate goods. And then somewhere you're going to produce the final good. And then you need to get it to those who want to use it. And that may be through several intermediates. And then you finally get it to the user, the customer, the consumer. And often these supply chains also have a disposal part to them. Sometimes it's a trivial step. Sometimes it actually opens Pandora's box to a whole nother set of risks. And the reason we're talking about this is because we're not sitting in our backyard putting this all together. It's from around the world. And if you look at the shipping capacity over the last couple of decades and project it forward, you can see that that's not going to change. It's really cheap to move things around the world. It's very hard to overcome that cost ease of things being harvested, created, and manufactured and moved around the world as they get integrated and made into final products. So that's kind of going to be a given for most types of supply chains. But what is that supply chain? What is that stylized supply chain? Offer this came out of some work in the IETF working group where we were trying to say, well, what is the really foundational elements? And I think this is, as simple as you can get, that you have materials that are going to be following some kind of a design to put together into some kind of a production creation process. And then it's some distribution to the end customer. Now, earlier, you may want to do that for software, as for fish. Well, wait a minute, fish. We're talking about microelectronics. We're talking about software. But really, if you think about it, fish, food stuff, pharma, all these different areas of our economy have the same kind of building blocks. They have supply chains. So, harvesting fish, it needs to be kept cold. It needs to be, brought to port within a certain time window in order to be sold as fresh fish. And then it needs to be kept within certain parameters as it gets distributed to the end consumer. Well, there's similar quality checks and policy checks around all of those. Obviously in microelectronics, and you heard Brian White talk a little bit of this in his area, that the actual production of microelectronics is following a design. That design happens to be in EDA tools, so it's software based. And then you outsource it most times to some fab that follows that design. And then you check that the product coming out of it meets your minimum requirements, or maybe more than minimum, very detailed, depending on what it's going to be doing. And then it needs to be put into a product packaging that actually can be assembled, because those chips are very sensitive and you can't just slap them into a radio. You need to kind of isolate them. And then often these things get provisioned as they go out with firmware and so on. So, and then in this case, microelectronics disposal can actually lead to a whole issue of counterfeits and mislabeling and quality issues. So there's lots of things there. And then in software, I think there's very analogous steps and activities. The details are different. The techniques for measuring them and managing them are different, but the general management activities are very similar. So we also talked today about how 20 years ago, we had computers, but they were mostly corporate, they were connected, it was mostly IT type of environments. But now we have software enabled everything. So that's one big paradigm shift, and that offers big change. At the same time, how software itself is created changed. You know, it used to be you maybe pulled in a couple of device drivers, but you wrote everything. Now we assemble. There is a supply chain in software, never mind where your software then goes. And so those two together have changed the risk surface of software-based systems. Now, a mistake in software, whether intentionally or accidental, a quality escape, can actually harm people, the environment, and it's not just, you know, reboot and restore from tape. Oh, wait, we don't have tapes anymore. And that's across the economy. You know, you can, and there's going to be more examples of this, less versus less. So we need to get a handle on all of these different aspects of supply chain. A lot of the discussion this morning and in the community is about, well, we need to worry about intentional acts. And I will offer that, you know, it doesn't matter fish, chips, software. You also need to think about the unintentional acts, those mistakes that someone may leverage, or that, you know, can operationally pause your company, your product line, your car. You know, it doesn't have to be intentional. Now, I'm not saying don't pay attention to intentional. I'm just saying don't ignore unintentional. So be more holistic about this. So when we step up to this question about, well, what supply chain risks should we manage, you can come to it from different perspectives. So it could be, I'm totally COTS, ICT, you know, the electronics, the software. It could be, I'm thinking about outsourced services. And now that's not just somebody coming to install something or maintain it, but rather, you know, the DoD basically outsources engineering. They have Lockheed or somebody design their product, and then they outsource the manufacturing of it, and then the warehousing of it, the shipping of it. Many of us do that. So all of these have risks in that service interacts with our organization's, you know, lifeblood, and so it could impact us. So how is it secured? Is it reliable? Is it safe? And so on. You also then, of course, where we talk a lot about is trustworthy and secure and safe goods. And again, that could be food stuff, it could be pharma, as well as, you know, your different products. And then counterfeits, a very big problem in different parts of our economy. You know, managing counterfeits takes certain approaches. Now, how you detect them, how you inspect for them, very specific to the type of technology, but the general idea of there's a risk of counterfeits, I think, is very reusable one. Then the whole logistics and flow. One of the bigger aspects that, you know, we've all suffered through in the pandemic was, you know, choke points that weren't choke points, but now they are. How do we anticipate that? How do we optimize them? And then medical devices. They're kind of a combination. They're hardware, they're software, but they're very safety oriented. They have very fine tolerances. And then, of course, the suppliers. You know, are they going to be around? Are they under the influence of my competitor? whether that's a country of concern or just the others in your market. All of these are risks. And then trying to buy and sell. So all of these different communities have different ways of talking, different ways of looking at risk. And it's part of this that we see as one of the big problems that we need to address in supply chain risk and risk management is, what risk are you talking about, and will somebody else actually understand what you're talking about? So we see that often when people step up to supply chain risk, they get inspired, and on a whiteboard or on a piece of paper, they start writing down all the things they can think about. The trouble is, no one else is going to understand exactly what they're talking about because they're using their words, their understanding. So, a common vocabulary, a way of thinking about these risks is really something we need. Now, we could also have people borrowing from others that seem to be doing well until they realize that other project has a different risk tolerance. They have different operating environment, they have different technologies, and pretty soon everything that they borrowed is being swapped out. So neither of these really are good starting points. I think they're things to consider, but what we've offered is that, a lot of people think about third-party risk, but they don't necessarily think about all the details that can come through third-party risk and third-party risk management. Often they don't think about counterfeits and attacks. They don't think about all the different natural hazards that their supplier or their supply line could actually be impacted by. And they quite often don't think about the human hazards that are out there. So taking all these different things together, what MITRE put together in what we call our system of trust is something that is a good starting place for everyone to think about on the risks you may need to manage. And so we're been putting together from every and any source we can find, understanding of supplier and supply and service risks. Now that's a huge pile of risks, and no one would ever expect, any project, never mind all projects, to go evaluate all those risks. So the second part of System of Trust is a way to winnow down to a profile, to a subset, given your resources, your type of industry, your requirements, to something you actually can then manage and evaluate and make decisions on. So we basically have, as you've probably been hearing in my words, looked at this across those three dimensions of supplies, suppliers, and services, and we've come up with 14 top-level risk areas. And the reason we have 14 and it doesn't all sum up to one number or one thing is, if somebody's in great financial health, but half the product they send is counterfeit, does that mean they get a 0.5? No, that probably means you're going to go find a different supplier. So these are not things that can be summed up and averaged. They're actually, risks that you need to pay attention to. And then what we've done is started collecting all the things underneath external influences that you may need to delve into. And it doesn't matter if you're just worrying about that influence in that my supplier also supplies my competitor and actually sends more product to them than they send to me, and therefore I could be disadvantaged, or it's a nation state type of influence that you're worried about. So all of these risks are being collected. Financial stability, a lot of the investment world is very good at how to look at the finances and the viability of companies. So we're harvesting from those sources. And then in product quality, from the hygiene point of view, different products, different types of domains have different quality, standards. So we're bringing those together. So when you put this together at the top level, it looks something like this. So you have supply chain risks, the three different domains, and then the top level 14, and then the next level down. Now, I just walked you through those three, but it really is a mind map. It really just starts feathering out. Now, this is the catalog of what you may want to evaluate. It is not what you should evaluate. And so what we've done is we built a data model about how these things are connected, including how you could roll up scores and weights, and because not everyone thinks about risk the same way. So you may be very concerned about one thing and someone else may, I don't care about that. So you need to be able to have that change. We built a content management system because remember, we want to have this collection. We want you to be able to get a sub collection that actually has integrity. And so that's why we have this dynamic content management system to let you do that active subsetting that then you go do your evaluation against. And we've been doing that evaluation a couple different ways. We have a prototype of a system that you can do in an AWS online way, and we also can output it to a spreadsheet so you can actually put real data into it in your enclave and protect it. So, because once you start evaluating these questions, it can get sensitive real quick. So we've been doing a bunch of piloting. The numbers up there are the number of actors in each of the pilots. So 11 was the number of companies we looked at. I'll show you an example of that in a minute. But we've also been looking at how do you represent the results. So if you get a lot of data, put it together, then really important bad things can actually get swamped by marginally good things. So if there's something in there, like in the government, if you need to have a clearance and you apply with the 18, 19, 20 pages of data, and you answer, yes, I'm a convicted known felon, that's a showstopper, right? So there are risks like that in every industry. So how do you get a showstopper to bubble up and say, hey, there's something down here you got to pay attention to? So we've been looking at how to do that. So to wrap it together, you got a data model. We're building the system of trust from that data model. It's a hierarchy of risks in those three areas: supplier, supplies, and services. You come into it from a point of view, a use case. You get a subset of the system of trust, and then you evaluate against that. If you have a different point of view, you come in with a different subset of system of trust, and then you evaluate against that. And so the idea here is you get that tailored situation. Now, we're not saying every time you do an assessment, you do this tailoring. You basically think of your business and you may come up with one or two profiles that fit your different scenarios, and then you repeatedly use that. So you have consistency. So this is one example. Early on, we did this one looking at 11 organizations. I know it's a little bit of an eye chart, but if you look at the blue in the middle, you can definitely see the upper left versus the bottom right. There's a much bigger surface area in the bottom right. And that's basically, think of that as the risk surface area. So you can really differentiate here. Now, whether those risks, what do they mean to your system, to your project? That's where you have to then go look at them. So let's zoom in on one of them. And here you can see the next level down. So the midnight axis is the external influences. And here you can see that the sub-risk categories for that actually were all green. So they're actually a numerical metric behind these, and we bin them into a stoplight representation. You can see the others have some reds and yellows. But in this area, it was all green, so we didn't increment up the risk past zero. And that's, now, you would want to go in and say, well, wait, there's a red and yellow over here in organizational security. What does that mean? What are you asking this organization to do? Does that have consequences? What can you do to mitigate it? That's the next step. So one of the big things we're trying to do with this approach, and this is the tool, the content management tool we were talking about, the risk model manager, is there are data sources, ways of getting this information. Some of it's out and available from government or other sources. And so we've started putting those into the tool. And the idea here is that then which questions, what risk questions can be answered by those sources, we're mapping those so that when you actually get, and this is an assessment pane example, you can see there's down here mapping to two of those sources. One is general research, and one happens to be, I think, Bloomberg from this slide. There's lots of them. The next step up is, well, can you retrieve that data in a parsable way so you could automate some of these? Because a lot of these data, there's very specific criteria that you could capture and follow. So we think there's a good percentage, but it's like 30% of the risk questions you may want to ask. There's going to be a lot others that you still have to do some hard work, but you can do it in a predictable, reproducible way. So one of the other ways we think you can collect information about a risk, this is a close-up of the mind map, is to look at certifications. And this is one example. The Telecommunications Industry Association has a new supply chain security 9001 standard. And they've got like 96 requirements there. And so if a product or a company has been certified by a third party as meeting that, that should mean something about the risks that they have been addressing in the way they operate. And so we've worked with the people at TIA to start mapping their requirements to the risks that those requirements would actually address if somebody really followed that requirement. And so the idea here is when you come in and are doing an assessment, if they've been certified, you can say, yes, they've been certified. And then as you do the assessment, it will say, when you get to a particular risk question, it'll say, by the way, this is TIA certified. It means they met these two requirements. Does that actually help you in your evaluation? So we're trying to bring in this kind of knowledge that's already out there. Another example in the control system world is ISA IEC 62443, which is pretty much the Bible in manufacturing and automation in the industrial kind of context. And we're working with them to map what they've already have, but they're also interested in pulling into their framework from System of Trust things that they could start doing. So they want to build out their standard to more completely address supply chain security. So it's a two-part dance with them. You also have things like Open Group's Trusted Technology Provider, which looks at malicious insertion and counterfeits. So you could map these as well, and we've opened that door with the Open Group. So the other thing I wanted, and a little note at the bottom, is a lot of these other public sources are great for commercial, publicly traded companies or companies that got into trouble. You'll find that, but there's a lot of companies, you're not going to find a lot of these pieces of information just sitting out in repositories. So the ICT Security Task Force at DHS had put together a common vendor questionnaire. They put it out as a PDF. Well, we want to make it into a form that you could actually go have somebody fill out, give it, and put it into this tool so that you could actually get some of those same metrics that you get from people who have public filings and such. So that's another part of this. Bottom line, we want to be able to show like with like. We want people to be able to have a repeatable approach that can fit their time, budget, and needs, that they could evolve as they learn. And we think part of that is the traditional supply chain of physical goods moving and then being moved out through distribution and resellers has a new aspect, which is a information flow. So whether it's SBOMs or declarations about provenance or the attestations about what was done, All these things will be part of this flow and will help us manage risks that System of Trust would be identifying. So we think on a vocabulary level, on a terminology, we can also clean up the discussion so that, you basically, System of Trust hopefully will inspire, similar to the way MITRE ATT&CK is done in the cyber realm. When people talk about attackers, they have much more consistency about how they think about it and decompose it now than they did 5 years ago. And so that's the goal we're setting for ourselves. Part of that is a lot of outreach and engagement. I gave a version of this at the RSA conference this year and a couple times since then. A lot of engagement with different parts of the executive office and acquisition. Also got to learn some new friends in the Senate and other parts of Congress that I'd never briefed before. But what we really want to do is get this out and shared and get feedback. So very soon we're going to have this available. There is available right now a public website. That's a couple of slides later. But we want to also make this knowledge base, this body of knowledge out for review, get feedback, improve it. And we're going to be doing that as well as, get it involved in standards work. I mean, this could be a template for what boards of directors and officers are expected to be considering. And that wasn't my thought. That's from 2 people out in industry. So we're doing a lot of publications about this. We'll be doing more in the future. And I said we had a website, and we're also starting a community effort around this. Basically, we've got 19 companies and counting. They've got different roles. Some are microelectronics people. A bunch of them just have really hairy supply chains that they want to share some of their lessons and learn from others. You also have vendors of supply chain illumination, as well as critical infrastructure SMEs and cybersecurity illumination, as well as community engagement. We have a couple people that helped bring ATT&CK out to the community, have volunteered to help us bring this to the community. And then also we have some retail banking and third-party risk management people, as well as some people on sustainability, because sustainability is an emerging area of supply chain. And so that's a possible risk you need to manage. So we've got NDAs with a bunch of these people because we used that model when we built out CWE and CVE and CAPEC. Let people donate their insights without anybody knowing where the came from, because then you ask questions, well, why do they know about that? We're right now looking at making this a more public community. So if any of you are interested in getting involved, SOT@mitre.org is our email. We're looking for people in all aspects of this. We really think it's a good complement to the different efforts that have been going on, but it's going to bring what we talk about as risks into more coherence across the industries and across the world. So with that, I have time for questions if there are any. I don't know if any online.
Yes, there is one online so far. Does SOT map to 800-161?
So John and I have talked about these quite a bit, and I think of SOT as what is it you're going to consider as the risks that you will manage, and 161 is more about how do you organize yourself to manage those risks appropriately for your enterprise. So they dovetail together. There's a little bit of overlaps, but I think they're very compatible, and we're looking to make sure that they support each other. Yep. Hello.
Hi, Bob. My name is Lucy Thompson. I saw on one of your slides it said there was a no-cost licensing arrangement.
That's in our plans, yes.
So could you just explain what the cost would be for an organization and what are the logistics of getting involved?
So system of trust, the body of knowledge is freely available. So as we put more and more of it out there, anyone can peruse it, can download it, can use it. When we make the tool we've built, the content management tool available, we plan on open sourcing it eventually. It needs a lot of maturing to get there. So we would make that available. It's a fully cloud native application. We have infrastructure as code. So, if you have an AWS instance, we can give you access to our code repository, and then you can clone it and, install it. So from your point of view, it would be, running that, having the resources. Our version that we're going to make available will link in to publicly available sources. We'll talk about commercially available sources, but we won't, have automated connections. That's definitely possible the way we're implementing our automation. And so others could make those kinds of interfaces. You'd need to put in your own license and credentials and get that. So, that will end up probably being your biggest cost, is to get the information. And it's not just what you buy or find out in the internet. It's also, depending on the risk you're trying to manage, you may need to get a device and an X-ray machine and do destructive testing if that's the risk you're trying to manage, right? So depending on where it is, some of these questions, nobody's going to give you the answer, but we're offering you the questions in a consistent, repeatable way.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Klasky.
Hey, Bob, how are you?
Good.
What's your latest thinking on metrics? Knowing that risk is contextual a lot in what we're talking about supply chain, but how much thinking have you done on sort of standardizing a way to think about risk scoring and metrics across the system?
Right. So inside System of Trust, we have a pretty flexible way of bringing the risks together. So at the very lowest level, is this risk really here? And so sometimes one piece of data, yes, it's black and white, right? Other times it's, this is hinting to it, and this is hinting to it, and maybe together, okay, now I have some pretty good confidence. Okay, fine, the risk is there. Well, how important is that risk to you? So the model has a way, the tool has a way
Set your own risk.
of giving those. We're going to give them defaults, but you can tweak them in your profile. It's part of the setting of the profile. And in fact, with an upgrade we're just finishing on our internal version, you can actually be in the middle of an assessment and you realize that what you're getting doesn't make sense to the analysts. You can actually go change those weights while you're doing an assessment. And so the way we've done this is you can actually swap out the body of knowledge with updates and upgrades, and we'll notify you of changes, but you should be able to keep your profile. You'll inherit new things when we add new things. When we delete things, you'll know that. So that whole change management is something we need to, put together. We had the same problem with CWE. When one day after we'd done like 5 updates, we got some vendors saying, hey, we use CWE in our tools and you made a change, but what was the change? And so all of a sudden we had to make publicly available what the changes were so people could understand. And I fully expect we'll be doing the same thing here because we did with KPEC and we've done with all the others.
There's 2 questions I'll weave together here. Are there industry examples of early adoption for SOT, and what's the timeline for availability?
Okay, so early adoption, I think right now is engagement, and that was what that last slide was. So some of those companies that have supply chains are looking at SOT. and looking at, does it capture the kind of risks that they are already trying to manage? Does it give them ideas for additional things? And so it's that kind of, they're kind of kicking the tires and checking out what's under the hood. We're also offering them the option of helping us upgrade from a V4 to a V6 and put in a turbocharger. But, so we also have quite a bit of engagement with the companies that offer assessments in these areas, because I think they want to, look at SOT as a way of showing, here's the world of possible things. And by the way, these over here, 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 and here, I offer services that could help you answer those. It'll give them that backdrop, that landscape to explain what they're offering and what kinds of risks. Because right now they're doing that themselves. Each of them is trying to describe why you would want to use them. And they're, nobody will believe them, right? Because obviously it's the marketing department that's doing it. So that was similar to what happened in the software assurance tools. Each code scanning tool was describing what they could do for you. And you listen to their spiel, every one of them helped you with everything you needed. Well, no, they helped you, but they had focuses. So this is the same thing we think happened in the attack world as well. Now you can articulate what part is my product or service helping you with, and where can you go from there? Did I answer the whole question? Oh, timeline. Well, it's not as quick as we'd like. We had some good funding going in, and it's now in question. So now we're reassembling the deck chairs to find others that want to help us with this. We have good candidates with industry and with different parts of the government. So this is just a recent change. So we're hoping to have a lot of good things this fall and this early winter that will really engage and get people actively involved. We hope early September, mid-September, that we're going to have a spreadsheet version of the knowledge base that people can look through. Sometime not too far after that, have a version of the risk model manager that you can then get an account and look through the knowledge base that way. And we hope that will also let you play around with building profiles and so on. That's about the most we're, quote, committing to. We have better, bigger plans, and it's just a matter of getting help, getting support. So I think we're about time.